All right, guys, welcome to the beginning of week 6. We are halfway through the course, a little more than halfway through the course. We have 4 more weeks to go, wrapping up July 28th. So this week, I want to make sure that everybody gets discussion questions 8 and 9 finished. I know we've been hitting it pretty hard in terms of those discussion questions, and it's kind of tough with Scarlet Letter, but we got to do that book and get through it. It's an important text for us to understand the main theme of sort of the era that we're entering in, which is the rise of literary culture versus popular culture. That will be a huge chunk of exam 2, which is going to open this weekend, but you're not going to take it till the weekend of July 11th, somewhere in there, somewhere before the 14th is when it closes. So, as we work through this, keep in mind that with discussion 6, we've started talking about fiction and the rise of fiction, how novels served a didactic function, education. That's where we see that in the Coquette. Module 7, we talked about the rise of the tale and of the short story. That's a term that did not come into vogue until the 1860s. So it's more appropriate to use tale, but we saw the rise of Washington Irving and Edgar Allan Poe. Make sure anytime you write Edgar Allan Poe's name, you spell Allen, Allan. There's a lot of Allen on the discussion question. But the main thing with those is the way that that tales flaunted their fictionality. And that's a huge theme that comes as we evolve into the rise of the literary culture with Hawthorne, Melville, folks like that. The main idea there is that for fiction writers, for literary writers, the idea that the imagination creates a more perfect reality. The imagination, invention can explain reality better. The main emphasis in literary fiction is in the idea of ambiguity. That's ultimately what the Scarlet A stands for, not adultery, but ambiguity. So as you're reading that text, look for the ways that Hawthorne creates all sorts of confusion about the meaning of different symbols, the meaning. This is really the era in which symbols become an important tool for conveying multiple meanings or contradictory meanings. And the idea is that the moral imagination needs fiction in order to pose these issues and to come to some sort of some sort of provisional conclusion, accepting the idea that we can never know the real truth. Popular fiction is more about advice. It's more about, it grows into what we would call sentimental fiction. It gets stereotyped by the literary writers as being women's fiction. So you can kind of think of the popular fiction as woman-centered, as kind of the contemporary equivalent of romance fiction, although it's much more about morals, about moral choices. It's much more akin to the Coquette than the Scarlet Letter. Um, Most popular novels would never have a heroine who gives birth to an illegitimate child. That's just not going to happen in that period. Um, so, again, focus on the difference between literary culture, the power of ambiguity. Melville will come to call it the power of blackness, the idea of searching for deep truths, the idea that the popular marketplace can't handle the truth, the idea of symbolism, of ambiguity, the resentment the male writers felt toward popular female writers like Fanny Fern, who you'll read at the end of the week. Hawthorne referred to the popular marketplace as a damned mob of scribbling women. That gives you an idea of how many male writers regarded it. When you read Fanny Fern, you'll come back and you'll see how women responded to that accusation. Much more aggressive than Anne Bradstreet was in her poem, but making much of the same argument and taking the men to task. So just keep those differences down, keeping an idea of the main things that the three main characters of the Scarlet Letter represent. Hester represents um, compassion, what Hawthorne saw as the feminine duty of sympathy. She really becomes the hero of the Scarlet Letter because she chooses to come back at the end of the novel and put the letter back on and serve as a kind of confidant to the women's community. Chillingsworth is science, jealousy, um, and Dimmesdale represents religion, but also secrecy, the inability to confess to truth. And so we have this whole confession scene up on where he rips open his shirt, and he has a scarlet A on there as well. Whether it's magically appeared because he feels guilty, or whether he scratched it into himself, we don't know. But the point is that for Hawthorne, either explanation is possible. He's not going to tell us which to believe in. He gives us both and lets us decide. But the ultimate point is the audience doesn't want to hear the truth. And so you can point to the scaffold scenes in the Scarlet Letter when Hester is first brought out in front of the Puritans, who are, as a culture, portrayed as very mean and almost turned ugly by their anger and their desire for vengeance, punishment. And then on the opposite side, people like Hester, who are willing to grapple with moral ambiguity. So that's the main gist of what we're working on right now: literary culture versus popular fiction, and the idea in both cases that it's about searching for an audience. The literary marketplace understands that it's not going to be bestseller because people aren't interested in the darkness, in the complexity, in the ambiguity, and they resent the popular marketplace. Popular marketplace, for their role, sees it differently. They are into counseling their young audience. Um, they're not into entertainment yet. They are into teaching women the dangers still of seduction and romance, and but also teaching women a sort of self-sufficiency, not to fall for the seductions of men or romance that they might have picked up in novels. So in a sense, we're still dealing with the types of approaches that we saw in The Coquette. All right, that's the basic gist of it. I'll be back probably Saturday to post a study guide for the exam. And I really want you to think about how you studied. If you weren't happy with your performance on the previous exam, think about the types of questions that were asked. Think about what you need to do to prepare for July 13th, 14th, whenever you choose to take that exam too. What you need to do to improve your performance. I know you can do it. A lot of this class is just learning to study better and thinking about our reading comprehension, because that's what we're ultimately um, trying to figure out. The skills that we can apply best, that we take out of this class, even if you don't care about literature ever, is the writing and the emphasis that I keep hammering on in these discussion questions: thesis, argumentative purpose, argumentative structure. That's going to serve you well in the professional world, but also the tone of professionalism. And then in terms of test taking and understanding reading, the reading comprehension. All right. If you have any questions, please email me. Otherwise, I will be back this weekend.